I have some copies here of the actual paper that this is referring to that I've used through the years. And so I'll give you that, including the professor's notes and the grade that I got. So
What's your grade?
those as well.
Spoiler alert.
This is not a performance, it's not a performance environment, not on the treadmill.
There you go.
A couple of things, if I may. First of all, I have a top 5 theology paradigm shifting resources that I have referenced. And one of those is a book called To Know and Love God. It's in what's called the Foundations of Evangelical Theology resource. And the author is David Clark, who is a longtime professor of Christian thought / philosophy at Bethel Seminary. And he came here about a dozen years ago or more and presented pieces of that are, if you will, a kind of 301 understanding of cultural shifts that are happening below the surface, including non-foundationalism, foundationalism, and soft foundationalism, which I know are really big words, but have to do with progressive Christianity and how we navigate relativism and those kinds of words. Anyway, this resource is in short just called an evangelical theological method. So where are the gutter lines in terms of what we would call out of bounds versus in bounds? And so it was a wonderful weekend that we spent. I have audited his apologetics class through the years. When I taught there for about a decade, I got to interact with him along the way. And but I'm sorry you missed it. And I didn't get it recorded. So I contacted him and asked if he would be willing to come back, and he's agreed to do so. And that's at the bottom of the little email that I sent out. But it did not have a date, and I have that date. It's April 19 and 20. And as most of you probably are aware, if you participated with us before, if you save that Friday in particular, I essentially will sit in this space with a select group of leaders like yourself and others who might join us. And we'll just do a one-on-one with David Clark that day. And we'll get to know him personally, as well as through the conversations I'll have with him about the big picture of the book. And then the next morning on Saturday, as we've tended to do, then we'll ask him to do 2 lectures with questions and responses on that Saturday morning. He'll present specifically on some of these kind of key concepts. And so again, it's not an easy read in terms of the work that he does, although he's a very good writer. So it's 301, 401 kind of material, but listed but he does it in a kind of 201 way. And he's an excellent communicator orally as well as a writer. And so I'm excited for him to come back, and hopefully we can get a good solid recording of it so that it lasts beyond, because he does a better job of he's a first order experience as opposed to me trying to translate it. So can't tell you how strongly I feel about David Clark, April 19 and the morning of the 20th. So excited about that. And that Saturday morning is something then that you could invite those who you know of who may have a heart for to come as well. Christian, did you have something to ask?
Do you have times on that event?
I'll send them later. So, but basically,
Okay.
Eastern time, it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of, you might say, 10 to 3:30.
That's downright incarnational. You're putting it in my time zone.
Yeah, it's me, baby. I'm there for you, buddy. I love you. There's some free resources back there on the table as well. I don't accept books because most of them, frankly, are no disrespect, but Chuck Swindoll and Max Lucado, which we love, but 101 type resources. And but occasionally I get access to a library that goes beyond that and is more in terms of a resource, a reference library. And so anyway, I couldn't say no. So those are across the back. About half of them are gone now, but within the next couple of weeks, I'm going to clear that out and give those to a couple of ministries that that they benefit from them as well. A minority ministry in Marshall, and some have also been sent to India through our friend Timothy. If you're interested in those, you can take a quick glance, and there's boxes under the table for you to take them with you. So typically the way we run this is that in our lunch lectures is that I'm going to run till about 12:45, 12:50. And the only one who beyond me has permission to really engage, if you will, is my co-host today, John Gilman. And so he'll watch for any landmines that I might hit or clarifications that I might make, or if I just get boring, he can kind of spark things up a little bit. But if you'll take any notes and resources, that way we prioritize the content that I'm trying to cover, make sure everything that I think would be helpful to you that I want to say gets covered along the way. And then John can jump in as he sees fit. And then we'll open it up for dialogue and conversation. We always have a hard finish at 12:15 along the way as well. Okay, sound good?
1:15.
1:15.
Is that what it is?
Thank you.
Okay.
If I said something different, I was confused about Pacific time versus.
That's right, incarnational.
Eastern time. Yeah. Okay, John.
All right. So I've had the privilege over the last for more than a decade now to meet with Rod about once a week. And there's some themes that just keep coming back up. And I usually don't write them down in the moment, or I do, or I forget where I wrote them down. And there's been multiple occasions where over the last decade and a half, I've texted Rod and I was like, what was that repair model again that you shared? Like what did the P mean? And or whatever. And I just keep asking him over and over. Recently, I was like, I need to write this down. So for me, one of the ways I absorb material better is if I try to explain it or write it or teach it or something like that. So I was actually working on a document on this topic, or just a letter. I'm going to read the opening for it and then hand it back over to Rod. But this was it. It's called Hope for Breaking Out of a Rut. And I wrote, it would help if there was a solid support system in someone's life. This is a quote from my assistant minister, Corey Whitaker. It would help if there was a solid support system in someone's life when they're in a desperate situation. Many times, by the time someone is desperate enough to reach out to us, we discover there is no support system. It's hard to build that support system post-tragedy or in the midst of tragedy. And then this is a true story, nuance to keep it anonymous, but her marriage was a mess again. She had cheated on him in the past. He'd cheated on her too. Now there were trust issues. Her friends didn't value the marriage commitment and they were telling her to send him packing. There were drugs and alcohol involved in their relationship, and now there was a child in the picture and disagreements about parenting in their relationship. She had seeds of faith, which is why we were meeting. She didn't like her life and she wanted to change. We talked about following God, about forgiveness, but there seemed to be a barrier there. I think she wanted God to bail her out on her terms, not to follow him on his terms. As she explained her situation to me, I felt like any advice I could offer would only be as effective as handing her a Dixie cup to build your flooded basement. Her relationship with God was underdeveloped. She didn't have the kind of friends that would point her in the right direction. And she was making one poor choice after another, which was digging the hole she was in deeper and deeper. In part, I wished I could pause her life, send her to a 5-year Jesus and life skills training facility, and then transplant her back into her situation with different friends and a different mentality. Sometimes my role is just to listen and care for people, and sometimes they're looking for advice and next steps. As I explained the situation to Rod, he wrote out an acronym that put into perspective what I was feeling and gave practical next steps. How do you help a multi-layered person facing a multi-layered problem You point them towards addressing the 6 areas represented in the acronym repair. So for me, this is something that has helped me in coaching people that wanted advice, or just recognizing personally why this situation seems so overwhelming, and being at peace with knowing that it's just more, it's a larger problem than I could address in one setting. So there's lots of reasons why this has been beneficial. And every 6 months or so, another situation comes up and I'm like, oh yeah, what was that repair model? So thank you for giving us this paper, because the acronym is on your second or last page, in case you're a note taker like me. And I tried to summarize that in this document, Rod, so I'm going to compare with what you've done here. Over to you. Why do you like the repair model, and tell us about it?
All right, thank you. On a real practical basis, just so you know that within my iPhone, as illiterate as I am, and as much as I struggle, I do have in albums things grouped together. So for instance, this one says Grace Words. It's got a picture of a couple of pieces of paper. This one says life stages, so I'm able to kind of quickly refer to something if I'm discussing, where we ought to be at certain seasons of our life. And yeah, then I've got my quote unquote right, left brained one, and one of them is called the bridge. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you don't have access to repair model. I'm not sure that you'll be able to sort of navigate the memorization of it, but if you'll take a picture of something, or if I put a canvas together and send it to you, which I'm willing to do, you take a good picture, then the access to it when you need it, I think is really helpful. It's just a real practical example that when I'm sitting at a table and I'm trying to say, now, what was that again? To have a picture of it, I can open up and work with it. So that's extra. So let me be very, very practical and deductive about what I'm wanting to help you with today, and then we'll unpack it. It was about 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday night. I taught here at our institute. I had gotten a phone call during that from an individual who was a leader that I had invested in the past, and with whom I still from a distance pastor. And I got home about 9:30 and said, hey, I could talk now if you'd like. We did. I sat on my screened-in porch as he said to me, there's a guy that I'm on a statewide board with. He lives in a distant city from here in the northeast part of the state. And I asked him how he was doing, because I could tell he was very pensive in our recent board meeting. And he said that his marriage was in crisis. And so I'll call him JT, was asking me, how can I help my farmer friend? Now, immediately I went into a kind of default mode. And again, anytime I say the word default, I just want to say up front, I always think of the Holy Spirit, the illumination of the Holy Spirit, asking Jesus what he would have me to do as the white space. So whether I'm looking at a piece of paper that has these kinds of wisdom principles on it, or experiences that I've had, or if I'm writing on a whiteboard, I always try to remind myself, of course, we say, Jesus, what would you have me to do? So I don't want to live in vows, and I don't want to live in principles apart from the person of Christ and the Holy Spirit and Father. So just as that's the default. But beyond that, the default is immediately I did 2 things. Number one is I said, hey, JT, let me help you help your friend. Now, that goes so far because, to be honest, I've talked with a friend as another resource. I've texted, we've been texting some this morning. And so, but I'm still empowering JT, and he's in regular communication. And I taught him this acronym. So first of all, I said, hey, let me help you help him. So this next tool is a way for us to coach others as our leaders, to say to them, this is what is needed. And that's the repair model. And it simply goes like this. Relationships experts, relationships experts, publications and podcasts. Relationships experts, publications and podcasts. Attendance, meaning like church attendance or club attendance or with, okay, you get it, under the teaching and ministry of God's word. Attendance, I is invest in others, invest, and R is recovery, / like 12-step. All right, say that with me if you will. All right, let's work through that. Relationships, experts, publications and podcasts, attendance, invest, and recovery. Again, relationships, experts, publications and podcasts, attendance, invest, and recovery. Now, what happened historically was that as I was leading the pastoral care ministry, I remember a certain Thursday evening, and my Sabbath day was on Friday. And I remember it being about 8:15, and I had 22 voice messages, tells you what year it was, voice messages left on my answering machine that I wasn't going to be able to get to. And I had made a determination again that I was not going to violate a 24-hour period. So I knew that I wasn't going to get back to these people, probably not on Saturday, probably not on Sunday, but on Monday. I was feeling completely overwhelmed by it. At the same time, I was I was doing my doctoral studies, and I was taking in this course an advanced pastoral counseling course. So along the way, I began to navigate through this resource, which was required reading, Strategic Pastoral Counseling, a short-term structured model by David Benner, which kind of helped to get my thinking going related to what I recorded in the paper here. But as a result of that, I just began to realize that the kind of expectations, the way that I was thinking about the expectations of pastoral care needed a paradigm shift. And these are the two paradigm shifts. Number one is related to the concentric circles. And yeah, go ahead, you do that.
All right.
So the concentric circles are core in the innermost part, congregation, and then crowd, and then city. In other words, I was beginning to think more clearly about the ways in which I was a limited resource. I was a limited resource with limited time, and I had a responsibility related to the stewardship of my time and the resources of the ministry that I led as to how I was going to be able to navigate that into the future. In other words, at this point, I wasn't 28, I wasn't 32, I was more like probably 41, and had these levels of responsibility. And so the first paradigm shift had to do with, what is my core calling? What is convergence in terms of working on more cylinders? And while I was willing to do whatever was needed, I wasn't going to make it. I mean, it wasn't sustainable. And I didn't feel like I was Ephesians 4ing, meaning I wasn't equipping others for the work of ministry. So that's the first paradigm shift, is that I had to begin to think in terms of percentages and investments of my time. So John, if you wrote $5 under city, and you wrote $50 under crowd, and you wrote 250 under congregation, and 500 under core, it'll give me a kind of metaphor, if you will, an analogy to work with, to describe this first paradigm shift that I had to make. And this is before, quote unquote, Love Columbia, okay? So this is when the front desk, even as a church planter, you would get 5 to 10 calls a week. I'm at Midway truck stop, my car broke down, I'm trying to get to my uncle's funeral, which is in Minnesota. Could you give me $15? I'll tell you, this is an aside, but the easiest money that ever got raised by a nonprofit in town was when Pat McMurray and Jane Williams came to the Evangelical Pastors Fellowship, as well as the broader community, and said, hey, you know those calls you get during the week? What if we became the clearinghouse navigating those? I mean, we were pulling out our checks in a hurry. It was like, okay, great. But some of you minister in spaces, and I know this is true of Christian and even of John, where if you're ministering in a more rural community, you can't just say, call Love Columbia if they can't help you, I don't know what to do. So all this was before that, but still, again, I use that as a metaphor that increasingly there became a way in which people within our circle of the congregation were saying, hey, I know a friend who has a need. Like they can't pay their electric bill. Well, immediately in my mind, and it doesn't matter the number because that's dependent upon the size of the ministry that you're serving or if you have access to the resources. And I mean it beyond money, but I'm using this as the analogy, is that rather than saying no to them, it was saying, yes, I can say yes at $50 to your friend. Are you feeling me? I can't pay the whole electric bill, but I don't have to say no either, because what I can do, in other words, every time I'm asked, hey, can you counsel me for the next 6 months? Can you mentor me for the next 20 years? The answer is every week for 2 hours. What I can say yes to is, and that's really the paradigm shift I was making. So the closer you got to the relational commitments, the closer you got to the resources that we provided, the higher the amount of energy and the amount of resources, the amount of money that we were willing to take. The greater investment, the greater the benefits. That makes sense? You feeling me? And so therefore, that was the first paradigm shift that I had to get to. John, any
How, well, I can go 100 ways here, but because tell me if you want to go there, because one of the most difficult challenges for me in ministry is, where do I invest my time?
Yeah.
And because in my role as a local pastor in a rural church, there's pieces of all this, so my core would be leaders in my church, small group leaders, things like that. There's the congregation that I meet with weekly. And then, and I have a heart for evangelism and wanting to reach out, and I enjoy that. So there's a part of enjoyment for me too. For me, I've felt the tension of, I want to be out here and doing this, but oh shoot, I can't forget about this. How do you navigate that? And is it calling specific? Is it gifting specific? Does that change for Luke? Because he's, I don't know. I assume you have a passion for that, but you also have the leadership both of you have the leadership responsibility of the larger group. So yeah, are there ways to navigate that? I assume
go ahead.
I assume it's a little different for everybody, but not completely different for everybody, right?
The contribution that I make to that is something along this mantra. I do for one what I wish I could do for everyone, or I do for some what I wish I could do for everyone. So what I mean by that is that given the role and responsibilities and the callings that I've been given, then I'm saying yes to one parent and teenager who's asking me to walk with them, or I'm saying yes to 1, 2, or 3, that I can meet with them occasionally and mentor them through their junior high and high school years. And I've done that pretty consistently and walked with 1 or 2. So do for one what I wish I could do for everyone. Similarly, as I think about the passion for evangelism, it was like I could be on one board, like Job Point board. I could do for one what I wish I could do for all the requests that I get. So again, there is a kind of stewarding that I'm doing along about where my yeses are yes. And so finding spaces to walk within your passions and callings.
Which is interesting. Honestly, which I'm sure I originally got this quote from you, but that quote was ringing through my head this week because there's a group of students that I've sat with at lunch that I think I'll probably go over there a couple times a month or whatever. But I was like, man, I wish I could do this with whole bunches of different groups or, and then I'm like, just do for one what you wish you could do for, so I think you've ingrained that in me, and that is a good guiding.
Yeah.
I have a little piece at not being able to do everything I'd want to do, but trying to do it well with this one.
Right. And I would add that in addition to that is that you're thinking about how you're robbing someone else of being able to potentially sit at the same table. Meaning you can duplicate yourself, again, in the spirit of Ephesians 4, as we grow older in ministry, then there's an increased responsibility that we give ourselves saying, how can I say to JT, now you do the work and I'll walk alongside you. And so I have had a couple of conversations with JT about how he's going to help his friend in North Missouri, even though I've already said that didn't work out perfectly, where I am also up engaged and involved. But whatever I'm doing, I want to resource him along the way as well.
How is this idea? How do these two fit in the same paper? What is it because I'm going to coach somebody, but like this gal I met with in my story, we met one time, we didn't keep meeting, or whatever. Is that kind of how you're navigating?
Well, the way these are related is that the ways in which I'm going to, so everybody gets to be the beneficiary of my healing resources when I can get to them. Everybody gets, so again, in my mind, I'm playing out a concrete specific example. Hey, Pastor, can I meet with you? 22 calls. So my first paradigm is I'm thinking through this. How connected are they given my limited time? So there's a sense in which, no, I can't meet with you this week. I can't even call you back this week because you're in the crowd. You're a friend of a congregant because of my passion for that friend. But what I can say yes to is that I have availability 3 weeks from now on Thursday at 2 p.m. So that's the first paradigm that I'm talking about, is that other than doing for one or a few, what I wish I could do for everyone, I was thinking through the grid of the closer they are to the leadership core, the more urgent it becomes for me. But until I had that first grid, I didn't know how to participate in these relationships. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So urgency is another way to look at this. That helps.
And the second paradigm then, and I'll walk through these next, but the second paradigm that I mentioned, 2 paradigms, the second paradigm related to this repair model is that I now begin to think about a catalyst for other ministry works around me. In other words, I begin to think through partnerships. I began to think through the books on my bookshelf. I began to think through a collection of helpful resources. Okay, so let me be concrete, specific now. So I'm going to do this out of order. Okay, I think you can hang with me. So now I'm sitting with Lynn, and Lynn is telling me about their life. In this paper, I've described it as I've met twice. So I have limited amount of energy. I've said yes to one, and that's kind of a breaking the ice, getting to know each other. And I'm going to say yes to a second time to make sure that as a member of the congregation, this individual is going to get secure. I have a basic policy, again, white space. I have a basic policy that no one's going to get the attention more than 5 times. So no pastoral counseling is going to happen more than 5 times. And that would be, again, with a discipleship mindset or doing for one what I wish I could do for everyone. Again, I'm navigating, how sincere are they in their energy? How stable are they? What's God's calling in my life? And I'm also, in my case, I was also protecting the resources of the ministry. So I had staff, and I'd have to say to those staff members who, again, over the following 10 years after this 22 voice messages Thursday evening, I can't do this. I eventually had 2 or 3 who were walking with me. And I'd have to say to them, how many times has that person been in your office? We can't do for everyone. We have to be more limited. And again, it's not that everyone is valuable, but how are we stewarding the resources that we have available? So when I was sitting with this individual, navigating how much energy, resources, stewardship, one of the things I would say to them, and said it to this farmer when I talked with him 3 weeks ago, the farmer in Northeast who's having a crisis. Very important, invest. Hey, Tony, if you ever get better, would you be willing for me to call you and connect you to the next person who's hurting? In my advanced pastoral counseling class, and he said, oh, I would love to do that. Again, you could see all of a sudden he's thinking, oh, you think my life could actually get better? You think I could have a better day? You mean there could be redemptive purposes to the pain that I'm going through? In my advanced pastoral counseling class, I told this story, and I remember getting to the end of it thinking, what the hooey did I just do? And the story that I told is that Jeff Payne, I'll name him, he's with the Lord now, but a friend of Larry Glabe's, Larry had sent him to me saying, hey, Jeff's in a really bad way, he's a neighbor, and I don't think he knows the Lord. So Jeff came to see me, and after about a 2.5-hour conversation, Jeff basically said to me, hey, look, my girlfriend just left me. God live, he was well in his 40s, I'm sure. He said, my girlfriend just left me, and he said, life has no meaning. And before Christmas, I'm going to pack up my boxes and I'm going to send them to my mom. And my lease runs out, and I'm going to take a gun, and I'm going to blow my head off. That was kind of, what he presented. And that fast, I said, you're a selfish brat.
Writing that down.
The white space. I think I was led. And he had, what? This is not how, but anyway, this is the story. And I said, tonight at 6:30, there's a group of people who are coming over to the church, and it's a recovery group. And some of those people, they got like really, really, really like big problems. And so I went through 2 or 3 of those, the loss of a child, serious addiction. And I said, you know what? Somebody could make coffee for them, and that could be you. So I got to the end of presenting this to the class. Now I was like, oh my, what did I just do? Just feeling shame, And I remember the professor, Dr. Preisner, he said, oh, well, that's pretty dramatic, but you all know what Rod did, don't you? Screwed up, And he said, no, he invited him into community. So every time you say to someone, hey, if you ever got better, if you ever wrapped your mind around your financial debt and crisis, would you be willing? So this becomes a catalyst for other ministries. This is a way to find the felt needs of the ministry, at least the individuals. So what began to happen over the next, you might say, 15 years or so after this was felt need ministries began to get created or partnerships developed with other faith communities to say, we don't have that resource. This is an easy pick, but we don't have the resource to help your teenager. But my friends Luke and Hannah with Young Life will come alongside them and help. Can we make a call and do our best to get your kids involved in club? You see, all of a sudden that was a new way of thinking, is that I've got to have people, I got to have resources, I got to have partnerships. I remember during the Iraqi war, was it Kuwait? Yeah, when we the Kuwait issue, etc. We went over there. You know that we were left with 4 or 5 spouses of servicemen who were deployed. And so just kind of that fast, just formed a little group in a club where they could be in space with each other, instead of, again, the stewardship of the resources of one of our staff meeting with them as they were navigating the crisis. So you begin to think of a catalyst of others. All right, yeah.
Before we hit that 12:45 mark, don't forget to tell us about
That's where I'm
these.
at.
There we going? All right, good.
Thank you. So relationships just means that, so when I talked, when I heard from JT, who said, I'm concerned about my friend, I immediately said 2 things. Number 1 is, let me help you. See, I'm thinking about congregation, helping somebody in the city. Let me help you help your farmer friend. And I immediately then went to number 2, which is repair. Can you write these down for me, JT? Relationships, expert, publications, attendance, invest, recovery. I said, hey, you're a friend to him. Spend some time with him, check on him, be a friend. So relationships is about people within your sphere of influence, other students, whom you can say to them, hey, is it okay if I ask somebody I know to call you? And then just make a connection, because your friendship group, your relational dynamics are not good. Understated. They're not good. You need healthier relationships. And then you begin thinking about, well, then where can I get them connected to healthier relationships? And because of people that you've helped, you're able to say, you know, I know somebody who's navigating step parenting because they're in a blended family. Experts. So, of course, you guys would know. I have some growing trusted therapy would be 1. Financial counselors would be 2. Know somebody who knows a little bit about how to navigate marriage, finances, what would be some other ones that they would be dealing with? Troubled teenagers, parenting, complexities, etc. So we need to get you connected. So again, for me, I was developing a resource center, still have it with this farmer, where I've sent to him New Life clinics. And I can say, hey, I've been to one of those workshops in Dallas. Takes a little money, but my golly, it's cheaper than therapy and certainly for him, divorce. And so go check out Every Man's Battle. I was saying to him, I was saying to this farmer, I sent him just this morning. I was like, hey, maybe your wife, since she's not religious, she'd be willing to check out Marriage Encounter. So I sent the website and texted it over. So you develop this repertoire of the kinds of spaces to send them into. Publications and podcasts. Again, podcasts didn't exist back when I wrote the paper, but so we would keep just a set of books nearby in the church office, and it would be like Changes That Heal, Step Parenting, can't remember his name, but there's an expert. Here's something on eating disorders. Here's something on adult ADD. We just, begin to develop a repertoire, and within our budget resource allocation, we would just keep supplying, having 8 or 10 of these kind of basic resources. And what I found that I'm sure you've experienced is you can almost resource somebody with something that's completely unrelated, and they'll get helped by it. If they're sincere and the Holy Spirit was at work, they can read something in this subject and really find some real mileage out of it because they don't have much to work with. So if you find some quality resources, especially if they've been helpful to you, of course, in the realm of podcasts, are you more of an oral learner or you're a reader? I'm not a reader. Okay, well, here's a podcast that I think will be helpful to you. And so again, things that have been helpful to us, things that we know about, things that are recommended. Attendance. Hey, you know what, Lynn? Your attendance like once every 3 months, that's just not really going to work. Again, I'm saying to them, you're in the crowd, and until you get in the congregation, and I didn't create these resources for you. That's what I would always tell them. I didn't create this repair model for you. I created it for me. It's what I do. It's what I've needed. Especially in times of crisis in my life, I've got the resource already available. Hey, if you ever get better, so show up. You got to come to club. You got to come to the space. You got to, even turn the channel on your radio for a while so that you find yourself experiencing something different. You've got to get you oriented in this time of crisis to be under good, solid wisdom teaching and gospel proclamation. I is invest. Hey, if you ever get better, would you be willing? Now, look, the farmer said to me just again 3 weeks ago, as we hung up after about an hour and a half conversation. So, hey, what's your charge? I said, oh, it's very high. Very high. Oh, okay. Well, I think he went on to say, I got a big farm. It's a several $1 million operation. And I said, well, okay. I said, when you get better and you find yourselves investing in these resources, I have an expectation that you're going to give back to others. You become a part of the healing solution for others. I'd love to do that. Again, that invitation to invest. And the last one is recovery. So this is really more, you might say, along the 12-step lines, but as we are able to form spaces in which there's access to grief share, there's access to divorce care, there's access to celebrate recovery nearby, perhaps it's even in another church. I remember when we had Crossroads here for a while, that I'm sure needs to be reignited, that parents of teenagers who are using drugs could, find themselves space to talk with other parents and to change themselves as they're instead of trying to change their teenager. As a catalyst for other ministries, then we begin to partner and to say, you need to be in a space for a while that's about Financial Peace University, where you're forced to keep a budget. You need an accountability group like Sobriety Support or your 90 meetings in 90 days. So I was constantly trying to think, and again, as people were envisioning what it might mean, then these individuals would begin to create workshops, even if it's just a one-off, doesn't have to be a full-blown ministry, but just kind of one-off. Hey, a group of friends or a group where we'll do teaching on step parenting for a Friday night and a Saturday morning, or etc. So you get what I'm talking. I think that's everything I got. So
That's awesome. All right, so I have a question that I want you to answer before it's over, but I'm going to open it up to questions for you guys, because usually I'm chewing at the bit when I'm in your seats of asking a question. And hello, Elizabeth, I see that you're on there too. Yeah, my question before we're done is, you said you made this list for you, or you have this list for you. So I would like for you to personalize it and how that exists in your life. But
those environmental factors, you mean?
well, yeah, how is
Yeah,
Rod
you bet.
part of the repair model? But
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
open it up to questions for anybody. What do you got?
Affirmations as well, responses.
Okay, I'm going to my question then. All right, think about it, what are things that you'd like to share? So. All right, you said you did this for you.
Yeah.
And are living it out.
I built these in.
Can you go back through that and then just tell me how
I can.
that's happening in your life?
I have to pause because I have to limit myself to all I could say about how critical these are. So the one I would mention is in terms of relationships, I've met for the better part of 20 years in just a regular fall and spring. We do take breaks with a group. And I have typically been the mentor of those, but in my own crisis, I become the recipient of them, as well as just in the mentoring that I still do. When I tell my story and I express my, what's happening, more vulnerability about the missus and I are navigating how to be parents of adult children, those kinds of things. I'm able to share that with those groups and also with those with whom I'm investing in.
So by relationships in your life, you've got some people that the trust level is incredibly high, and it's life-giving relationships, God-centered, that's in your life.
That's right. And I have to kind of open my palms to receive the ministry that they're giving, which is
Experts.
oh goodness. I think of that not only through curriculum, but also through specifically the counseling that I did 3 times in my life, some intensive counseling. 4, I guess we count Steve Call, whom some of you remember. But so just sitting with a therapist and saying, here's how I'm doing. Can you plow some ground in my heart in order for me to get a new perspective on the struggle that I'm experiencing? But I also think of it as financial as well, the days where I did the envelope system and those kinds of things in order to become more disciplined. It wasn't a crisis, but it wasn't fun either to not have a quote unquote grip on money.
And then would you put conferences in that category? You just went to a conference this week. Would you call that experts, or is that your publication, or is that a?
Yeah, I would think of that more as sort of
Professional
being in the
development.
publications and podcasts of resourcing that I personally have needed.
Okay.
I haven't thought to that, but yeah. So books that have been paradigm
I was
shifting.
just gonna say, that might be an understatement, sitting in a theological library here, but what would you say on that?
Well, particularly again, the resources of navigating life. So Henry Cloud and John Townsend have both, are classics. There are all kinds of folks who walk more recently the conversations around trauma and neuroscience. Those are all personal growth areas that are just more recent that are helpful. What you begin to find is that, again, there's kind of the 101 descriptions, and I find those helpful. And then you can start going back, and I'm really helped if I can get back to the 301. That's just kind of the way I think. So I'm looking for the next level of what's the bibliography of those who are translating, who they're actually reading. And if I can find those, then that's even better for me, because I could think at that level.
What's important for you to show up at? What's your show up things?
For sure. Well, I think of it, of course, in terms of my own regular hearing the scriptures taught, but I also think of it in terms of attending in the morning when all I can do is just walk on the golf course, as I do most days, and listen to music and let the music just kind of wash over me. And I'm not a musical person, so that would be an example of that.
Yeah.
And investing in others, I think that's pretty obvious.
Right.
And then I have done, the work of making peace with your past. I remember back in my early days here in Columbia, I attended Overeaters Anonymous and walked through for a season, the 12-step program applied to food. And that was a real good exercise in surrender. And I think it, it helped me navigate, if you will, the weight that I've maintained.
Can I ask you a question on this? So in recovery area, is it kind of go do it? And then is it more ongoing, or is it more been there, done that, got over that hurdle? What is it in your life, and what most likely do you see? Is it something that's always going to be on? I know there's pieces that are always ongoing, but is there
I think
a
of it,
hill to get over?
I think of it more as the pieces in like a baggage carousel. When it comes back around, I need to revisit my basic flesh pattern or patterns, and then kind of unpack the luggage again and say, I find myself codependent in these kinds of ways. And therefore I can reach over and grab the Conquering Codependency curriculum that I've been through at some season in my life, and I'll leaf through it again. And so that's the benefit of that.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Questions,
you all thoughts?
questions or things?
How is
that
this
were-
helpful?
Yeah, what was helpful that he stated? That's Jana, you want to jump in?
Oh, yeah. Oh, you saw my face.
I look for the eyes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, good job. I think it's maybe a question and an observation that I want to test and see
Please.
as a question. Okay, so because I'm trying to think about like how would I differentiate between an expert and the recovery process. In my mind, like the way I'm sensing that they're different is an expert is a very active segment of time or space where maybe a very distinct formation takes place. Whereas recovery are tools that we're acquiring in how to, like, we're learning tools that we will then later be able to resource. Would
I
you
wanna-
say that that's?
Yes,
True.
and I want to add to it
Okay.
that and individual versus group process. So we
Okay.
may underestimate in spiritual formation, as one example, the power of group process, so that by hearing each other's story in a regular, committed group, so it's still isolation
Mhm.
when you're under an expert's tutelage. I mean, this farmer is all excited about the counselor with the Gottman Institute. Again, I'm navigating the fact that his wife is not believing, not.
Right.
So the Gottman Institute has been my appeal, even though I happen to have heard that this woman has a faith base, and people that I know in the capital region have a trust in her. But he's pinning a lot on the counselor. And I'm trying to affirm all of that while saying this is not sustainable long term.
Right.
We've got to create a lifestyle, got to create a world around you. And so I think that the group process then becomes hearing somebody's story becomes informative and transformational for my story.
Mhm.
You're associating the word group more with the recovery piece than with the experts. Is that what I was hearing? Yeah, that's a good distinction. That helps me. Okay.
And again, I reference spiritual formation because I think this is an added need we're talking a lot about people being spiritual directors, which I want to affirm. But what about creating spiritual direction groups? And the power of that shared life experience as opposed to just an individual.
Elizabeth and Christian, wanted to give you a chance to jump in. I know it's harder online to say that. Anything you want to add or ask or input?
Elizabeth's teasing me about.
Got it. Christian's unmuting there. Go ahead, Christian.
I can offer the appreciation of having the same basic, you call them flesh patterns, kind of come up over and over again on a baggage carousel and need to be addressed over and over again. I think that's a really helpful image, both for us as people and for us as helpers of people, because people are going to experience people are going to experience stuff coming back around again and again. And a charming and sympathetic metaphor like that, I think, can take some of the weight off and free people. Free people to go back into doing that management work.
Yeah.
All I have to say. Nicely done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. On a very practical level, do you have any processes in place to help remind yourself to regularly check in with people that you're pastoring at this stage? You know, do you keep lists? Do you, or is it, I'm just driving down the road and I just thought of this person, wonder how they're doing? You know, because all these things are sort of, you're directing people in these ways. Does that make sense? Do you have a process, or is it more the white space of the Holy Spirit?
I do. So if I turn to my reminders, which is what I use, then you would find my list. And in those, you would find that kind of thing. So this one would be, TEI supporters. So I'm walking through that list. But then one of those is people who are navigating, and again, in my world these days, so I'm not talking about the past, but I'm talking about the present right now, is that there's a half dozen with whom they're in a crisis, and I am thinking through on a regular basis. How can I be with you? So there's both a kind of an intentionality that's more general, that beyond pastoral care, that is about just that. It's also about looking through my list. And it's also about the ways in which the individual comes to mind because they're working through a crisis presently. And there's usually about a half dozen of those. And then there's the one that I do for one, what I wish I could do for everyone, like this farmer that I'm walking with, or a teenager or two that I have navigated. But what I really want to say about the beautiful question that you've asked, and then I want to ask you two how you might apply what we talked about today to your support church. I like to use the word support instead of parachurch. Your supporting the body experiences. But what I really want to say is that I was significantly helped in the area of pastoral care when I experienced my own crisis in 2015 and 2016 by two individuals. One, his name is John Marshall, who was a longtime pastor in the Springfield area at Second Baptist. And over a supper, as he heard my story, he said to me, "I'll walk with you." And all he did that meant the world was he would send me an occasional text, and I bet he probably had a prompt. And I have put prompts in my schedule, but I forgot about that. But I have put prompts in my schedule. Like every 2 weeks, I'll put, text Luke, something like that. And so anyway, I get this text from him, and he would say, "Give me an update. Thinking about you today." And occasionally, just very rarely, I got a call from him for about 18 months. And kind of when the crisis subsided and we transitioned here into TEI, that was it. But he really did keep his commitment. And I learned a ton by just that kind of response. The second was Clay Spencer, who sincerely, would I'll never. He had heard word that I was in a timeout, and Clay sent me a text and he said, "I'm raising my hand to sit with you." What a beautiful metaphor. And the other metaphor he used was, "How's the weather in your world today?" That was a phrase that he used. Both of those, in addition to the time that I actually spent with him, and Julie and I on a couple of occasions, just to kind of sit. And the basic thing that Clay did was, "How can I be with you today?" And of course, that's become a key part of my ministry in this season is, how can I be with you today? And just available, to navigate crisis. So for you guys, how is their application for your work, what we talked about? And how?
You go first.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I just wanna, affirm and say thank you, because the concentric circles is like, if I'm taking, there's lots of great nuggets, but if I'm only taking one, I'm taking that, because in my work with college students, at some point, every student thinks the house is on fire, right? And there's a lot of them that call me. And historically, my tendency has been to be the first responder firefighter to everyone's fire, and then I'm burned out at the end. And so this is helpful. The idea of like, okay, is this one of my team? Is this on my leadership team? And then maybe I'm able to say like, hey, why don't you just come over and have dinner with us tonight and let's talk about what's going on. Is this a friend of a friend of a friend that gets my number, and then maybe that's more of a let me help you help your friend, which is golden and a great discipleship tool as well. And so I think that is huge for me, and just structuring how do I respond to these crises that come up, or moments that students are reaching out. So that was huge for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And again, underlying all of it, and this is what I hope is a legacy of mine, and if we were to attend my funeral, God forbid, 40 years from now. But if you did attend it, I would be disappointed if this weren't said, that how deeply Rod cared about, both for himself as well as for his peers, how we could be 73 and 83 and still the life of the Kingdom Party. So that's what I was navigating, is I'm not going to make it if I keep doing what I'm doing at 37 and 43, just not going to make it, because indeed your energy is diminished, which means you've got to find greater levels of convergence about what we're saying yes to, while still doing for some what we wish we could do for everyone in order to model. So every time that I'm even at the fellowship dinner of the potluck at our home church, and they're picking up tables, I always grab a table and a chair or two. I'm doing for one what I wish everyone would do, but I'm not taking charge of all the tables. And it's very similar here, is that we model that kind of servanthood.
Yeah, I drew that yesterday in leader training for some volunteers. For us, the language is what we call campaigners, but small group, club kids, non-club kids. So our vision in Young Life, there's 5,500 high school kids in Columbia. That's our crowd. That's our city.
Yeah.
In Young Life. And that if you're a volunteer, if you're a staff person, you're a part-time staff person, also season of life, being sensitive to the Holy Spirit, those numbers can fluctuate, right? So them knowing what their role is versus me, but the key part of that is I'm always investing something in all three of those categories. And I look different, but there's never $0 in any of them.
Exactly.
Right? And that's important, that understanding that. So yeah, that was when you drew that, I was like, I literally drew that on a piece of paper yesterday. And it's Master Plan of Evangelism. That's the book used to be required reading for Young Life leaders back in the day. I don't know if that book's still in fashion anymore, but but as we look at the life of Jesus, it's seemed to spend a significant amount of time with his core.
I don't think we said it explicitly, though we have communicated implicitly, but explicitly, we are cheating others we are cheating our 20-somethings out of the opportunity. The leaders that you're developing, you're cheating them out of something to use their spiritual gifts and something for them to grow in if we're doing the work ourselves. And that's why, we have to be very conscious of, we've been through that season where I've been the one who's taken $50 to McDonald's or Midway at a time where I was convinced by a story or whatever. I don't regret the season at which I felt led by the Holy Spirit to stop and talk to a person who was in the Nifong grocery store parking lot and to get them gas money, whatever. I don't regret that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that's what I'm currently doing, unless I have a strong But that's a part of my own development in that season. But we are cheating at some level out other people's spiritual gifts if we're not thinking about smartly about ours in
But
this
yes,
season.
this is very helpful in thinking about myself, where am I deficient? But also as I lead others, I mean, that's gold. Love
Mhm.
that.
Rachel.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a specific comment. It's just, I actually was at TED's 2 weekends ago taking a class called Teaching Others to Teach, which overlaps with this a ton, just
Yeah.
a sense of how are you thinking about not just teaching, but teaching in such a way that you're equipping them to go do the same. And so I don't have any like
Yeah.
concise thoughts on it. I was actually just looking back at a few of the notes and this just stuck out to me. It was a reflection question I'd written and it kind of comes along right with it, but it was just like, how do I steward what I know, who I am, and what I can do for the flourishing of others? So that stewardship concept, but also the idea of like, I want to grow them. I also have to grow myself in the right areas to be the most effective at doing that. I don't, all these thoughts are just overlapping, nothing
Yeah,
concise,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah.
All right, let's say it together. Repair without looking. You ready? Can you do it? Relationships, experts, publications and podcasts, attendance, invest, and recovery. Yeah.
I still can't get it.
All right, well, I'll make up the thing and you guys take a picture of it. You start an album that says repair model and then you can pull it up on your phone. John, let me, first of all, commercial. What are we doing next? Speaking of an album and a photo. Let me give a commercial for what's coming up. Got this little lunch and learn thing. Canva. Okay, November 16th. The Meta Globe as a diagnostic tool in your discipleship process. So if you're leading an organization, the big idea is to think about social architecture and its application. To how to decide whether or not our organization is as healthy as it could be. So there's something from Carl George's resource years ago over here called Preparing Your Church for the Future. But it's an organizational tool and a napkin drawing. A Meta Globe is a diagnostic tool. So something about critical mass and club in combination with small groups, in combination with leadership. If anything else, it's affirming, but it also is a way to help us. And yeah, anyway, the rest of them are listed there. I just wanted to mention that. I'll let you have the
Thank you.
last word.
Well, I was just gonna say thank you. I've enjoyed these lunch and learns over the years. Tried to make as many as I could, and I do think that it's good for us to have you teaching some of these things specifically, and I appreciate it. So thanks for making it accessible and all that. Let's give him a hand.
All right. Yeah. You're gonna read?
Ask for God's blessing.
You gonna read?
Oh, I just got rid of that. How I ended my.
This is an article that John was reading to me earlier today.
I was trying to, because I'm trying to put this into writing so that my chances of remembering things are better. And after I explained the repair, I said there's no quick solutions to complex problems, but recognizing and doing work in all these areas will make real and lasting changes over time. As we spoke, it became apparent that the reason that her problem seemed so overwhelming to me was because so many areas in the repair model were not being addressed. There is a way to get out of the ruts that so many people find themselves in. The repair model shines light in the right direction for true and lasting change. So that's something that I do want to share with people and pass on. So may the Lord bless us, help us, Father, to not just incorporate these in our own lives, but to teach them to those who we influence. May the vision of this be passed on when we share what we've learned in Jesus' name. Amen.